that I loved so much about the last two speakers, and thank you for sticking it out to me, was that we all want to relate, genuinely relate to our residents. Taylor went in, she became a resident in a nursing home, and so did Philip. I relate to my residents as well, but it's by chance. It's God's doing, if you will. I'll just start with a little background of myself. In the bio, it mentions that I had cancer, and that is true. But it was Hodgkin's disease, it was curable. But the losses that came from that cancer, that is mostly how I relate to my residents and what I need, what I feel that I need to correct in the whole system of assisted livings. I've also never done this before. I've never spoken up here or anywhere. So this is a big honor for me to even be asked to do this. I worked for 15 years in the post office, and 5 years into that career, I realized that I didn't want to be sorting mail for the rest of my life. This just wasn't what I really wanted to be doing. People I graduated high school with were now teachers. They were my customers that I was selling stamps to, which is great. But it made me want to be a teacher. It made me wish that I had finished my lifelong dream of becoming a teacher. So, working full-time in the post office, I then began my college career at night. What should have been 8 years, what should have taken me 8 years of the college career, took 9 because 2 weeks into student teaching, which is my last class, my last semester, that's when I was diagnosed with cancer. So it took me an extra year longer to become a teacher. Once I did finally become a teacher, it was 6 years of sending out resumes, taking temporary positions. I didn't know anybody in the education world to kind of pull me in and tuck me under their wing. And I was a substitute teacher, just struggling with jobs and no steady paycheck. I got to the point where I need a steady paycheck, and I don't care if I have to work in a factory. I was teaching still, preschool, when my mother's companion was in a nursing home, and I went to the nursing home just to visit him. But I went in with a mindset and the issue in my head of, if I stop teaching, that's what my degree is in, so if I stop teaching, what am I going to do? Behind his bed on the wall was this huge calendar, and the one thing that stuck out at me was a cupcake, baking a cupcake in a coffee mug. Now, as a teacher, I was a project-based teacher. So when I saw this calendar of all these fun activities, it seemed like something, I said, now that is something I can do. So, now that you know about me, I want to ask you all a question. If someone who already knew your name asked you, who are you? What might you tell them? A lot of people might go with what they do, such as, I'm a doctor, I'm a teacher, I'm a nurse, or I'm a mother, I'm a wife. This is your identity. It not only tells the person who you are, it's also what you do, but it's mostly what you value, what's important to you. During those 9 years that I was a student, that's what I would have answered. I'm a student, because that's how prominent it was in my life. When these residents come to us, they've already suffered many, many losses. If they valued the fact and they identified with the fact that they were a wife, chances are they've lost their husband and they're coming to us as a widow in the assisted living. So they've already dealt with that. If they valued the fact that they were a mother, their children are grown now. They have children of their own, and maybe their children have children, and their great-grandparents. They're no longer needed like when they had 5-year-olds running around the house. That's another loss. Their identity is one of the biggest losses. But there's also tangible losses as well. They've lost their driver's license, their car, their house, most of their furniture, except for maybe a bed and a couple of dressers, and the majority of their clothing, stripped down to just a few items in a closet in their one room. The intangible losses is their self-esteem. If you no longer have an identity, you don't have a purpose, you don't have a reason to wake up in the morning, you don't have a reason to get dressed. Why bother? On top of this, it may be irrational, perhaps, or I think it's the logic that sounds irrational, but the emotions are real. On top of this, our residents come to us saying or feeling like they've lost their family and their friends. They've lost their family because they're the ones who put me here. I remember a lady named Jo sitting in the lobby, and she was crying, and I knew she was new, and I went to her and I said, "What's the matter?" And she said, "Oh, my kids don't want me. I have no family. I have no house anymore." And we talked. On top of this, she was embarrassed for what she would have to tell her friends, that she needed help, that she was losing it up here, or her family thought she was losing it up there, and that she had to live in an assisted living. So now she had friends that she was too embarrassed to share this information with, and her family had just turned against her by putting her there in the first place. Residents come to us with these losses, and they can only guarantee through the disease of Alzheimer's that they're going to continue to lose more. And these are the things that we have to deal with, and these are the issues that we have to improve when we rebuild their self-esteem. When I started in the assisted living, and I've only been in this industry for 6 years, when I saw that calendar, I saw an ad for an activity assistant at the time, and I wanted to be an assistant because I was familiar with the kids, not the adult population. So, learning, I walked into the building and I'm learning everything. And one of the main things that I notice is the stigma of the memory care unit, between the memory care unit and the assisted living resident. There's a stigma there. I was hired for the memory care unit. These are the people who are my friends. I like those residents because those are the ones I got to know first. So if they're my friends, then I want the whole world to know how wonderful they are, because I think they're wonderful. And I want to share that experience with everybody, especially those who don't think they're wonderful. They think, "Oh, we'll stay away from that area." Removing the stigma was my first goal. And I wasn't sure how I was going to do it, but I realized it was important. Not only was it to show them how wonderful my friends were in the memory care unit, but also if they, the residents of the assisted living, ever had to move into the memory care unit, I didn't want it to be a scary place for them either, because I got to know them as well, and they became my friends. So I saw it as my goal to unify the two worlds that had been deliberately separated. I wanted to level the playing field between the residents in the memory care unit and the residents in the assisted living, but I didn't know how. Once I started getting to know the residents in the assisted living, on their interest survey that they fill out when they first enter during admission, a man had wrote that he was a harmonica player, and he would meet with a bunch of other men, and they would play harmonica once a week. And I thought, that's pretty neat. He plays a harmonica. And then there was also a lady that had a piano in her room, so I knew she played the piano. And then we got a gentleman who enjoyed singing Sinatra. That's what gave me the idea for an annual talent show. When I did the activities in the memory care unit, it was, we would do little things like read plays, we played musical instruments, we wrote stories and poems, and these seem like just biding their time activities. But for me, they were auditioning. They were auditioning for my talent show. I wanted to see what they could do, and I wanted to focus on that because I knew one day they would not be able to do that. Because as I said, the only thing that these residents can guarantee is to give us more losses. Their ever-changing skills needed to be on display, and they needed to be on display as they exhibited them. As I said, we read plays. One of the things I did, and because I was working for my friends, the residents in the memory care unit, it didn't matter if I did things off the clock, on the clock. So I did some research, and I went on YouTube, and I found a second grade play that was being performed, and I adapted it to what the residents could do. And it was important to me to have audience participation because the residents in the assisted living, who were also my friends at this point, I wanted them all to be equal. I wanted them to be participants and to enjoy the residents in the memory care unit as I enjoyed them. So the children's play was, it was based on a book called The Big Pumpkin, and it was a very sing-songy thing, and it had a narrator. So I took my best reader and I gave her that part of narrator. And I played the part of the witch. There was a witch, a ghost, a vampire, and all kinds of things, a little bat. And there's a refrain throughout it as we pick up this big pumpkin. And this big pumpkin was just a leaf bag, a big orange leaf bag. But I had the audience, I gave them the cards, and I said, every time you see somebody pulling on this pumpkin, tell them to, say this. Well, she tugged and she pulled and she tugged, something like that. And it was very sing-songy. And they did it and they enjoyed it. We practiced it before, and it became an annual event as well. We performed that every October because it was a Halloween play. Another thing that we did, like I said, we played musical instruments. I created a bell choir because I could get 6 to 8 people. If I pointed to them, they knew to ring their bell one time. Together they could play an entire song. And if we practiced with me pointing, they would play a recognizable song. So the audience participation there was that they had to guess the song. And I knew we had to play it well enough for them to be able to guess. And then I said that we wrote stories and poems. It was April. It was the month of April. And for those who don't know, April is volunteer month. So we talked about volunteers. I talked to the residents in the memory care unit. I talked about volunteers, what they do, how much we appreciate them, how valuable they are in society to each other if they volunteered. We talked about everything. Then I got the whiteboard out and I decided we could make an acrostic poem, even if they didn't know what an acrostic poem was. So I put the word volunteer vertically on the whiteboard. And I said, let's talk about volunteers. I need a sentence that starts with a V, but it has to be about volunteers. By the third letter of the word volunteers, they started to see a pattern to the point that they were saying, the EER at the end of volunteer. Everyone, everywhere remembers the volunteer. EER. So they created this acrostic poem, and it was so good and it was so valuable because it came from residents in a memory care unit who can't do anything, that it got published in Creative Forecasting. That's a very popular magazine in our industry. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but that poem is in one of the issues. Finally, for my last talent show, we were blessed in the memory care unit to have a lady named Betty who played the piano. She could still read music, and she loved Frank Sinatra. So I wanted her to be in the talent show. So she would play the piano during social hour just for enjoyment. To me, she was rehearsing, but to her, it was just enjoyment, and that's all I wanted it to be. The day of the talent show. Now, I'm all about self-esteem, building their self-esteem. I have all of their seats reserved for the performers so that they feel special. We invited family, staff, residents, everyone who wanted to join to be in the audience and see the talent show that year, as every year. And what I see is Betty's daughter is sitting in her mother's chair, and not as a performer, but sitting at her mother's chair as a visitor, and she has her mother sitting in her lap. This was her daughter's way of dealing with how her mother was to her. She was coddling. To me, I was trying to build self-esteem, so it was exactly the opposite of everything that I've been trying to do and the whole purpose of the talent show. Fortunately, the daughter had to use the ladies' room before her mother came up, and she came up to me, she said, "She's not going to do it. She's scared to death. She's not going to do this." And I said, "Okay, all right, well, if she won't, we won't, but we'll see." And she went off to the ladies' room. And when I introduced her as a lady, that, my next lady. I mentioned her name, and she was surprised to hear her name. And I walked over to her and I said, "I was hoping that maybe you could come up with me to the piano because I've heard you play the piano and you play so wonderfully. I was hoping that you could do this for everybody here." And she said, "Oh, all right. I don't have any music." I said, "Well, I happen to have My Way right here." And of course she was surprised, but she followed me up there. And as she's sitting down, she's cracking jokes. One of the audience members from the assisted living residents said, "How long have you been playing piano?" And she said, "Oh, about 2 weeks." This was not a nervous woman, but her daughter thought, she's not going to do this. She was just panic-stricken. And she ended up playing the song My Way. She stumbled through, missed a few notes, had to backtrack. But what I saw was that the assisted living residents were so very supportive of her. They were singing, because of course they're Frank Sinatra fans too. And they were singing with her and very patiently waiting for her, the music to catch up, and nobody minded. They all applauded and they were all cheering her on. Our activities that we create for our residents to build self-esteem do not have to be great things like showbiz and a talent show. They can be benign things. You just want to give them an identity back. You want to celebrate what they can still do every minute that they can still do it. One day, Anne was sitting in the living room. I had to walk past Anne because it was 10 minutes to 5. Dinner was at 5, and I had to set the tables for dinner. Anne said, "Where are you going?" I said, "Well, I have to set the tables for dinner." And I kind of felt bad that I kind of had to leave them to do it. And she said, "Well, do you need any help?" And I said, "Yeah. If you would, that would be wonderful. If you could help me put tablecloths on the tables." When I go over to the tables, I'm thinking, I know that there's a philosophy out there that says, that's your job. Why are you giving them menial labor to do? That's resident abuse. It's not their job to do this. It's not resident abuse for them to get their identity back, and it's not resident abuse for them to build their esteem. And I knew that I was right when Anne got up and she said, when she stood up from her chair and she said to the aide, "Oh, honey, I'm so happy. I asked her if I can help and she said yes. And now I'm going to go help her put tablecloths on the table." She did one, I did the other 5. I did my job. But I also did a big rebuilding of her self-esteem, which is the important thing. To me, I was just being, I don't know if I'm coining this phrase or if it exists, but when I say we should all be genuine caregivers, it came to me as a resident who said, she was an assisted living resident, and she said, as my friend, her name is Maggie, and I was telling her as my friend, I wanted to keep her in the loop of what I was doing here today. And I said, I've been asked to be a motivational speaker in San Antonio, Texas. I'm from New Jersey, by the way. And she said, "Oh, you're going to be great. And you're going to be great because you love what you do. And it matters. I've been here in this assisted living for 5 years, and I've seen it. You know immediately who is doing it because they love their job and who's doing it because it's just a job. And you love your job." Genuine caregivers love their jobs. If you love your job, then you love what you do and the people you work with, and you're working with the residents. The residents, let them become your friends, genuine friends. Everyone out here all has at least one friend. And if you can be a friend, if you can have a friend, then you know how to be a friend. And that's all you need to be to the residents in order to be a genuine caregiver, because we're all caregivers to our friends. In closing, I would like to leave you with this one quote. I don't know who said it. "To be a friend is to learn the song in their heart and sing it to them when they have forgotten it." That's how we are genuine caregivers. Thank you very much.